Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are watching from or listening from in the world. Welcome to another episode of MotoGP Last on the Brakes podcast with myself, Elliot York, and my standing co-host for this morning, early hours of this morning in Barcelona. So we're a little bit jaded, a little bit tired, but we're going to crack on and bring you a slightly different looking podcast than we've had this year. We thought, as we're in Barcelona, a lot of the paddock was obviously in Australia. The time difference is quite big. We thought we'd just have a bit of a natter about the MotoGP title race, because obviously we're coming into the last three rounds of the year. 2 points in it between Pecco and Fabio. Fabio leading the way, 40 points between the top five after Thailand. We thought we'd just have a bit of a natter. Get your questions into the chat if you're watching along live on Twitch and YouTube. We'll try and answer as many as we can. Very good morning to you, Jack. Hope you're not too tired, mate. I know it was early alarms for us both, but I'm looking forward to this. It should be a nice little podcast, and I'm looking forward to obviously being back in Australia. Well, obviously the paddock back in Australia, racing in Phillip Island, an all-time classic.
Yeah, good morning to you as well, mate. Good morning. Certainly, very, very early morning, to be honest. What time did we get up this morning? Around 3 a.m., something like that?
Yeah, 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
It wasn't the most pleasant experiences, but we move.
No, we can't complain, though, because, of course, our friends in other parts of the world do this on most of the weekends
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
MotoGP season, so it's not so bad anyway. But no, certainly quite an exciting one coming up this weekend. Of course, Phillip Island. I'm going to say it, my favourite track on the calendar. So very, very glad to have it back on the calendar after, a very difficult 3 years sort of thing. It's going to be a good one. Of course, the title race is getting spicy. I mean, it already was, but now 2 points between Fabio and Pecco. And you've got to say there's maybe a clear favourite as well.
Yeah, the momentum has certainly swung in the last few races, hasn't it? Let's touch upon Thailand and Japan, because in the last two episodes we spoke to Augusto Fernandez and Maverick Vinales, and we didn't get a chance to speak about the racing. So let's quickly touch upon Japan. Miller's victory,
Incredible.
probably his best MotoGP ride. I don't think there's any probably about it. Undoubtedly for me and for a lot of people, his best MotoGP rides. And Brad Binder and Jorge Martin stand on the podium, but couple that with Thailand for Jack Miller, that's now pushed him into an outside shot at the title, which obviously we weren't expecting before Japan. But what a ride it was back in Motegi for Jack Miller.
Yeah, incredible. I actually had the weekend off. Thank you to my boss giving me a little weekend off. But I happily watched the race on the Sunday and throughout the weekend. And I mean, Jack, even from FP1, was just on it. Of course, like he's lucky enough that he has some experience in Japan on the Ducati already. But so much has changed in the last couple of years with the bikes and everything. We saw them go so much faster because of the ride height devices and the aero. So still, it was definitely a readjustment period. But no, straight away he was quick and he was the clear favourite, I would say. Straight from the off all weekend. And I mean, he even said it himself on the Sunday after the race, didn't he? He'd never rode like that in his life. Jack is one of these guys where you got to say a lot of the times maybe he feels he can get more out of a race than what he has done, but he said there like that was 100% of his potential, and it really showed because he just walked away from the field. Like we haven't seen many guys really do that this year, he just dominated them. Yeah, incredible ride.
Yeah, I was in the broadcast set when Matt Burt was doing the after the flag interviews with the top three, and he was speaking to Jack, and Jack was just basically like, it just felt easy. And you could see that as well. We overtook numerous riders late on the brakes down at turn 10, is it, at Motegi? Turn 11? Can't remember which one it is now. The bottom of the hill, which one I'm on about. He said it just felt easy. And when it feels easy and you're that quick, it must be such an unreal feeling. And he was obviously buzzing about it. And obviously then we went to Thailand, but we do need to touch upon what happened in Japan with Pecco. Because I think a lot of us, including myself, thought that he'd sort of got past those silly mistakes that we've seen a lot this year.
Yeah,
And then to chuck it away from ninth place, was he? Fabio finished eighth, didn't he?
correct.
Took
Yeah.
it away from, it wasn't like for the win or anything, so it's very surprising to see Pecco do that. Obviously now we know that things happened in Thailand, but at the end of the Japan GP, I think we all thought this is now Fabio's to lose.
Yeah, definitely. It's been such a like turbulent mix of kind of fortunes and fates and all this sort of stuff in the second half of the year. I mean, we'll go into it later, but just like if you chop away the first 11 races pre-summer break and you look at the second half of the year, it's a completely different picture to what it was in the first half. Um, and as you say, like we've seen Pecco come on really strong, but then the mistake that, like, I mean, we can say it, like, it was a foolish mistake, and he even stood there in the gravel clapping himself for, as he quoted, how stupid he'd been.
Yeah.
And it's just like, unbelievable, because this man that goes and wins 4 races in a row, then finishes second, just misses out in Aragon to Bastianini, which is a whole nother thing we need to come on
Yeah.
to. And then he goes and makes a mistake like that when, really it's like, okay, of course he wants to get past Fabio, but for the championship, it was no harm just sitting there behind him if he was already on the limit. And as it did show, going into turn 2, he was on the limit. And yeah, I mean, I think everyone's head exploded at that point when Pecco went down. Like Matt Burt and Lewis Sotheby on commentary pretty much hit the roof. And, I think everyone else did as well.
Yeah, it certainly did. And then, of course, I mean, a lot. Thinking about it now, I didn't think about it too much before. But thinking about it now, a lot happened in Japan. Obviously, we had Alaish's error with the mapping that the mechanic forgot to change. So his race was ruined at the start. It looked like he was going to have a decent race. So yeah, that was obviously a disaster for Aleix as well. Obviously, he was very disappointed afterwards, as you can imagine, because you would be, of course. But then, yeah, we moved to Thailand. Fabio and Anea finished sort of lower end of the top 10 in Japan, didn't they? So it could have been a lot worse for Pecco and Aleix in Japan. On one hand, Aleix was obviously annoyed. And I spoke to him after, and I tried to put a positive spin on it for him, just to try and make him feel a little bit better. Obviously, saying that Pecco crashed, Fabio and Anea didn't finish that well, so you've not lost out too many points. But on the other hand, obviously, he was like, "Oh yeah, no, but I could have." Well, he said he could have won. I don't think anyone was beating Jack Miller on the day in Japan, but he could have been on the podium because he had decent pace to Aleix. So obviously, you're going to think about that as the rider. And then we went to Thailand, of course, and thinking Fabio was on the podium there in 2019, of course, in that battle with Marc Marquez. But that rain shower, well, I call it a shower. It was a bit of a monsoon, really. I was on the grid for Moto2 and it started raining, and I've never seen it rain like it. I mean, after the race, everyone was absolutely drenched heading to the airport. It was a bit of a joke, but at least we got a race underway. And all the fallout from it was Fabio not speaking to the media afterwards and storming back through his garage. A lot has happened in the last couple of weeks in Japan and Thailand, and obviously Fabio now is only 2 points ahead. So, what did you make of the Thai GP?
Well, I mean, for one, it was a pretty crazy race. I mean, I'm lucky enough I get to do the live tweeting for all the MotoGP races, and I sat there in that race, and I don't think I've ever done as many tweets as I had done in the race all year, because it was just like every lap there was something crazy. You go from obviously lap 1 and drama was already kicking off, and then you had Brad Binder and Aleix Espargaro make contact, and result in Aleix losing half of a wing, and then a long lap penalty afterwards. Him coming out just in front of, I can't remember who it was he came out just in front of, maybe his teammate Maverick actually. And then, Fabio dropping, as I say, on lap 1 from, where was he on the grid? I can't remember where he was on the grid now, but dropping all the way to 18th by the end of the first lap. And it was like, what's going on? Because we've also heard all of this stuff about how now Fabio in full wet conditions is actually really, really good and quite strong on the Yamaha. It's just still in half and half. That definitely was not half and half conditions. That was full wet.
No.
So you wonder what happened, but then obviously it was the first time they had any wet running in Thailand, and
Amazingly,
obviously, yeah, and Fabio's one of these guys where in the wet conditions he takes his time to build up to it. So I mean that's one side of it. Then you have to look at the race going on in general. Just Jack Miller once again being incredible straight out the bat in wet conditions. And like he said after the race as well, he's like, I know that in wet conditions when no one's had any track time, there's three guys that are going to be fast. And he was like myself, Johan Zarco, and Miguel Oliveira, and those were the guys that eventually ended up pretty much being on the podium, apart from Pecco, of course. And then there's the whole thing as well there, Jack saying to Pecco, like, come on, believe in yourself, you can do it in these conditions. And he goes and does it and has his best wet weather ride to date. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy race, to be honest. And then Marc Marquez was there lurking in the background the whole time, and you were just wondering when he was going to come through and pounce. And he did, of course, have one bite at Pecco, but Pecco got straight back at him. So it was a pretty crazy race. But, from with Pecco being third, Fabio way down and wherever he was outside the points, and then also Aleix in 11th, like, it's just teed up this ridiculous last 3 rounds in the championship, which we all hope is going to go down to Valencia.
Yeah, hope so. From a sporting perspective, it makes life a lot harder work-wise in Valencia, but that's the way we'd want it to be. But yeah, I mean, let's start with the fallout sort of from Fabio, because it was a very, very difficult race. And I wasn't surprised to see him storm out of the back of the garage. He was obviously very frustrated, knew what had happened higher up the field, saw Pecco on the podium, knew the gap was down to 2 points, and stormed out the garage, and then didn't end up speaking to any of the media, which was a little bit of a surprise, because obviously as the reigning world champion, as the championship leader, it's quite important that we hear from him after the race. Obviously he needed some time to sort of calm down, which also you have to understand from the human perspective, it obviously is difficult. We didn't unfortunately get to speak to Fabio and hear his thoughts. Obviously today, I think in the press conference, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than it probably should have been for him. He's going to get a lot of questions today, but he's probably prepared for that. A disaster really for Fabio. It's now 2 points with Pecco on the podium, and the pendulum has really swung, as we mentioned earlier on, in favour of Pecco. After Pecco suffered the DNF in Japan, when we thought, oh, okay, it's back in Fabio's hands. Now it's sort of back in Pecco's hands. Yeah, where do we go from here? I mean, Fabio's got, I think, this weekend to really try and build a bit of a gap, because Malaysia might not be too bad. I think a lot of riders are going to be quick in Malaysia obviously we go testing in Malaysia at the start of the year. But speaking to Maya Merigali after the race in Thailand, I think they're pretty much writing off Valencia already, which is quite a scary thought if you're Fabio and Yamaha.
Yeah, I mean, he struggled there in 2020. Obviously, the bike was a little bit different back then. But then even last year, he struggled as well. Like in the last 7 races last year, Fabio didn't win a race. And now we're at a point where he hasn't won in 7 races and there's still 3 to go. It's proper, I don't want to say crisis time, but it is a bit dire straits for Fabio at the minute. We can't forget this was a guy that was 91 points ahead of Pecco after, was it Assen? Or before Assen? After
Germany, when Pecco crashed, he was 91 points, and now it's 2.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, there was one card at the bottom of the pile that was pulled out in Assen with the crash with Aleix, and then every single other card has fallen recently. Only one podium in the second half of the year, and that at the track where we thought he was going to struggle the most, and then he goes and finishes like 4/10 off Pecco, who won it. So it's really weird. I mean, the whole, as you say, about the fallout after Thailand, where quite rightly he was really, really annoyed. I'm sure that if he was speaking to someone else off a camera, he'd describe it in stronger terms. But and also then this whole kind of fallout, as we say, is kind of rumbled on because recently we've seen him take a small break from social media, and you can't blame him for that. And I've seen some comments online recently about, this is Fabio and losing his head again like he did in 2020. This is absolutely not that. It's completely different. Like Cal Crutchlow said during the Thai GP weekend, I can't remember when he exactly said it, but he said that Fabio's just like this immovable rock. Nothing phases him. Like something bad will happen, he's like, okay, and then moves on. And I think this is again it, but we're seeing Fabio just deal with it in different ways now because he has that understanding of like, okay, I have to deal with it this way because in the past I tried to deal with it like this and it didn't work. So yeah, as you say, I mean, it's going to be a difficult debrief for him today. There's going to be lots of questions, and I'm sure people are going to ask him if he's feeling the pressure and all that sort of stuff. But I really don't think he is. I think he's one of these cool cucumbers that just will be fine now. So it's very interesting. And yeah, I mean, it all just stems from that one race, but it's put this huge question mark over, will he perform this weekend? But you have to say, with the way that he's kind of championed Yamaha's effort this year, you'd think that he'll come back this weekend and no problem. He'll be, fighting for the front row on Saturday and once again taking it to the Ducatis and the Aprilias on Sunday.
Yeah, well, like we say, I think this weekend with it being Phillip Island and a bit of a leveler, really, isn't it? Phillip Island, it's a track that suits most bikes. We saw Aprilia in 2019 when they weren't anywhere near as good as they were this year. Iannone and Aleix were in the top 10, a couple of seconds off the podium. So expect them to go well. Obviously with Maverick as well, he loves a bit of Phillip Island, doesn't he? But yeah, this weekend is huge, I think, and decisive, not just for Fabio, I think in terms of the title race in general, because 2 races to go, then it really starts to, if you're obviously Anea and Jack now and you're 40 points off, 40 and 39 points off, with 3 races to go, it's doable, tricky, but doable. But if you're sort of similar off with 2 races to go, then it obviously becomes a lot more difficult. But yeah, back to Fabio. I think this weekend is huge. You mentioned the fighting for the front row. We were looking earlier on, weren't we? And he's not had a front row amazingly since Assen.
Yeah.
And considering the tracks we saw coming up, like Silverstone, we thought he's going to go well there. At least fight for the podium. And be on the front row. I mean, the long lap penalty, fair enough, sort of ruined his race because he was in second before that and then couldn't do anything after that. But it's been so tricky since the summer break, and I think Thailand was sort of the camel that broke the straw's back in a little bit of a way. I know the 17th was obviously difficult to take, but I think he knows and he's seen Pecco's form since summer break, and Fabio's riding the wheels off that Yamaha. Absolutely riding the wheels off it. He couldn't be riding it any more harder than he is doing. But I think when you're fighting against all those Ducatis, obviously had Aprilia doing well as well. Japan wasn't a great weekend. I think he is feeling the pressure a little bit, or maybe putting pressure on himself. If that makes a little bit more sense, because I do agree with you. I don't think his head's completely fallen off. I think in this day and age, it's also important to, obviously, if you're in a world championship race, you've got a weekend off over in Thailand or wherever they were. It's probably good to just put your phone down, try and think about other things, train well, have a good time, try and forget about the weekend, and then bounce back, hopefully for his sake, in Australia. But this weekend is huge. Hopefully, for Fabio's sake, it's going to be a dry race as well, because that's another thing that is going to be very interesting this weekend.
Yeah, the weather forecast looks a little bit dodgy. But talking about this whole kind of break from social media and Fabio walking out at the end of the last race and just kind of dropping everything for a while, you know what it reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of when Ronnie O'Sullivan used to go for a bit of a toilet break. So I'll explain this if anyone doesn't get the reference. Basically, Ronnie O'Sullivan, probably the greatest snooker player ever. Whenever he was struggling in a match or whatever and was dropping sets, frames, sorry, not tennis, dropping frames. He'd go for a toilet break and then he'd come back and he'd win the next 5 or 6 in a row. And I don't know I'm not saying I want to make a prediction or a wild kind of theory at what this will do, but I really wouldn't be surprised if Fabio comes back this weekend and he's not a different animal because he's been an animal all year, but he just has that extra edge again that we saw at the start of the year when he was overcoming problems left, right, and centre. Um, it's going to be tricky, of course, because Phillip Island, as you say, like with the weather and all this sort of stuff, and it is a leveler, so it means everyone's going to be involved. And if you kind of don't really know what we mean when we say like leveler, basically we kind of refer to the way that the circuit works, because there's not many big braking zones in Phillip Island. There's not many big acceleration zones from slow corners. It's all very fast and flowing, and it's one of these tracks where the rider makes a bit more of the difference than the bike. So Fabio being down on top end power and acceleration, it shouldn't affect him so much here. And then you also have to, use the example, as you said earlier, about like Iannone and Aleix on the 2019 Aprilia that was the old engine configuration and, really struggled for power compared to the others. And they were still competitive here. And then also, if you're going to talk about kind of who's going to be competitive this weekend, we have to throw the likes of like Brad Binder, Miguel Oliveira, Marc Marquez into the bag. Those guys that are on bikes at the minute that aren't necessarily the best, but they're riders that know how to just drag it round to a lap in qualifying, and then on Sunday just pull something out and stick it on the podium. So it's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, in Fabio's circumstances, I say, like if he does come back from this break and all of a sudden he's back to fighting for the podium every weekend and getting the podiums, then all of a sudden it puts a lot more pressure on Pecco, because at the moment you'd say Pecco isn't feeling any pressure because he is the man with the momentum. He's the man that has the security of like, okay, there's other Ducatis on the grid that aren't going to help him because Pecco's already admitted he doesn't want that help. But it's whether Pecco admits it or not, it's another thing in the way of Fabio, where you have these other fast bikes that are, just in his way from getting to Pecco. So it's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, whatever happens, Fabio needs to do something because, I mean, in the last 6 races, he's only scored 47 points, and that's the smallest amount out of the top 5. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm really excited to see what his reaction is to this, because I think we are all kind of expecting a reaction now that he's taken this break.
Yeah, I mean, he needs a reaction, doesn't he? I think, like we say, if it's not going to happen this weekend, Malaysia is going to be difficult because I think, like this weekend, a lot of riders are going to be quick in Malaysia, depending on the weather, of course. And like we say, Valencia is not looking good for Yamaha with Ducati's form there last year. For example, Miller's been on the podium in Valencia for the last 3 seasons as well. Yeah. He's going to be, if he's not in the title race himself, then obviously he's going to be helping Pecco no matter what. Yeah. We saw Johan Zarco helping Pecco by not overtaking him in the Thai GP, which I thought was very interesting. I spoke to him afterwards, and he was obviously very pragmatic, and he's good with his words, Johan Zarco. He's a very switched on, very clever guy. And he said, paraphrasing, of course, he said just along the lines of, I knew what's at stake for Pecco. I didn't want to risk anything. I was happy with 4th place. Deep down, he obviously isn't that happy with 4th place, but it's obviously not a bad result. But he was very, very, very aware of what's been going on. But then we saw the unseen that MotoGP posted a couple of days afterwards. I think it was last week at some point, end of last week. Yeah. And we saw Davide Tarlozzi, Ciabatti and Delinia go to Pramac to say sort of thank you. And then we realised, okay, serious words have been had here. And obviously Pramac didn't look too pleased, which you're not going to be because you want your riders to be on the podium. And Zarco's late race pace, that's difficult to say after in the morning. Late race pace was pretty astounding, and he had the pace to win. And then I've got to the back of Pecco and didn't overtake. So yeah, that's going to be interesting again. And Fabio doesn't have that, of course, with Morbidelli struggling this year, and obviously Cal Crutchlow test rider. Although Crutchlow's done an amazing job since he's been back, by the way, like sensational.
Really, really good.
realistically going to be as much as you'd like to be. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this weekend, being a leveler, Phillip Island, Crutchlode's a race winner there, of course. Maybe he will be sort of fighting towards the top 10, but Fabio needs someone to be fighting for the wins against these Ducatis. And obviously Darren Binder's a rookie who is also doing a good job, but he's not going to be fighting for the win either. So that's another thing against Fabio that he's obviously aware of. So the cards at the minute are stacked against Fabio, I have to say, even though he is leading the title, but that's why we say this weekend is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it is. I mean, everyone's saying it. You know, if you listen to any MotoGP podcast this week, everyone's been saying, you know, this weekend is the pivotal weekend in the championship chase. Phillip Island really is one that can go either way. You know, it can either be a dream weekend for you, or it can be a complete disaster. And if one of those, particularly the top three or even the top five, has, you know, the perfect weekend or a disaster, it's just going to seal their championship fate essentially. So it's going to be a big one. I mean, you say briefly there about the kind of old team order situation at Ducati. It's going to be interesting because obviously, as you say, like Pecco and also Bastianini and all these guys recently. Yeah, you know, you're going to wonder when is the point where, and obviously Ducati have already had a firm enough stance on it. You know, they've obviously mentioned it, but when is the point where it's literally like, okay, no, like to win this championship, we have to have Pecco as the top guy, because obviously we saw even, you know, Miller finish ahead of Pecco last time out, where maybe you could say he could have dropped back and let Pecco by, but also I think Jack's like, you know, Jack's not going to roll over and do that for him. Of course, we've seen Jack let Pecco past in future circumstances. I think he did it in Kota this year, I think, where he looked over and just let him by. But that was in a circumstance where Jack wasn't having a great race. And now that Jack is on form, he's going to fight for everything he can. Particularly, I mean, now he's a motorcycle racer at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how good he gets on with Pecco. With Jack only being 40 points back or whatever he is, 39 or something, he's going to go for it himself. So, you know, it's going to be interesting. And
so
it's
he's
Australia,
not moving it out of the way this weekend.
No, I mean, he wants to make that honeymoon party on a Sunday night just as good as anything, and a win would set that off perfectly, wouldn't it? And you got to say, like, it is brilliant seeing Jack do really, really well, because he's a man that's probably had a lot more criticism and doubters than most in the MotoGP paddock. Rightly or wrongly, you know, and several times in the last couple of seasons when he's been down and, you know, almost like kind of down and out with some bad performances, he's come right back and punched hard and gone back to the top in some races. And you've got to say, like, it's pretty incredible, you know, like Simon Crafar said it plenty this year. As soon as he made that setup change after the Catalan test, he's just been a different rider, and it's really, really showing now. He's got the confidence in the bike. He's got the confidence in himself back. He's in a good place in his life. I think every single person would like to see Jack go and win this weekend at home. It would be, pretty special if he could do it.
I tell you what, if he wins this weekend and neither of the other three, especially two in Pecco and Fabio, on the podium, then tell you what, he's seriously
it could
in contention
happen.
to Malaysia.
It really could happen, couldn't it?
Like, it could, yeah.
This weekend, the amount of times we've seen like big pack races in Phillip Island. Imagine this weekend if you've got the likes of Jorge Martin going in, and we saw Jorge Martin what he said after the stuff with Zarco and Pecco last time out. He said, "I would have fought for the podium."
Yep.
So okay, we know Jorge Martin's stance. And then, you know, you got the likes of Brad Binder, Miguel Oliveira, both been on the podium in the last couple of races. Mark's going to be in there for sure. It doesn't matter if that Honda isn't where it needs to be at the minute. He is going to be there.
Will be there.
And then, you know, even guys like Zarco, you know, if Zarco is a couple of places ahead of Pecco or whatever, he's not going to lose those other places to let Pecco past. So, it could happen. It could well easily happen that you end up with just Jack Miller or just Enea Bastianini on the podium out of the top five in the championship.
Yeah. Let's talk more about Ducati then, because they've got one main contender in Pecco, of course, who's been sort of their star man, let's say, throughout the year, their sort of go-to rider for the title. They obviously signed him up at the start of the year until the end of 2024, sort of saying, right, you're our man, you three. At the time when Jack Miller, Enea Bassini and Jorge Martin, we thought it was going to be Miller or Martin, and obviously Enea has done what he's done this year and obviously got the ride for next year. But yeah, Pecco now 2 points behind. We were saying, weren't we? Well, I said it's definitely Pecco's to lose at this point. With put Japan aside, the form he's shown in the latter half of the summer, and Valencia being Valencia, he won there last year. Malaysia is going to suit Ducati. I think Pecco, obviously this weekend is huge, but I think it's Pecco's to lose with him being 2 points behind from here on in. How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I agree, to be honest. I mean, I'll make the admission, I put a bet on for Pecco to win the championship before Qatar. So obviously for a long time I was like, oh, that's not worked too well. But it seems to be coming back around the other way. And I mean, yeah, like you just have to look at his results. And well, since Assen, that first win that he picked up in that string of four, the only blip has been Japan, and every other he's been on the podium. Excuse me. So yeah, I agree. I think it is Pecco's to lose at this point, even though it's quite harsh and dismissive on Fabio to say that, because I mean Fabio is the world champion. Like Pecco is only, the man that is trying to grab that first world championship. He doesn't have a Premier Class world championship. Fabio does. So, there's that kind of whole thing of like, Fabio, I've been here, I've done it, you haven't, so don't kind of rule me out. But you can't deny that there's a lot of things stacked against Fabio at the minute. And it's very interesting, as you say, like, going forward, there's kind of an argument to say about, Ducati's choice of rider for 2023 as well, where it's like, okay, so Pecco, say if he doesn't win the championship this year, and arguably the last two seasons, they've had the best bike on the grid. I think largely it's agreed that the Ducati is the best bike on the grid, best all-round package. It kind of just makes you wonder if it's like Ducati kind of hedging their bets for having that top guy to go for a world champion, because that lineup of Pecco and Enea next year is an incredibly strong lineup with so much potential. And even if Pecco does win the championship this year, which he is the favourite to do so at the minute, Enea's not going to be phased either about going in there and trying to take the number one plate off his new champion teammate. So it's going to be interesting. Ducati, they've either got themselves a master team or a real big problem. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what your kind of thoughts are on it for next year, whether it's going to be good or bad. But, I saw the comment from Pecco saying that he hopes Enea will be like Jack next year as a teammate. I got a feeling he's not going to be.
No, we were chatting about this earlier in the week, weren't we? And I think Ducati came to a point where they need two riders who can fight for the title in the factory team. That seems really harsh on Jack Miller, because obviously Jack could still win this title.
He's not out of it,
we weren't saying 3-4 rounds ago. And if he goes on to win the title this year, outside shot, I know, but it's still possible, then Ducati might be made to look a little bit silly. But totally understand why they've gone for Enea or Jorge Martin. It was obviously Enea versus Jorge Martin in the end. The next year's going to be spicy for sure. But I think Ducati, they've had the best bike for 2-3 years now. This year it's been, I know the Aprilia's been very, very solid, a very fast bike and very consistent. But I think Ducati have just got that little extra. And obviously they're looking at it, think we've had the best bike for God knows how many years now. We've still not got a rider's title. They've had the constructors and teams titles, but they're nowhere near as important or as big as the rider's title. They want that rider's title. And I think they've done easy to say now, but I think they've done the right thing in hiring two number ones, let's say, because obviously signing Pecco before the year, Jack was sort of wingman at the start of the year, you'd say, sort of, right, Pecco's our man, Jack obviously do as best as you can, win as many races as you can, and if you can fight for the title, absolutely brilliant. And in the end, he still is fighting for the title. So is Enea Bastianini. So next year will be interesting. But yeah, I think third place for Pecco last time out was huge in the wet as well. He was saying after the race it was like a win, and you can understand why, especially with Fabio obviously not scoring any points as well. But he was struggling big time in the wet in Japan, and then finished on the podium in the wet in Thailand just 7 days later. So that was huge for Pecco. And obviously his form since summer has been outstanding, apart from the blip in Japan, like you say. So this weekend will be interesting in terms of, let's say, Enea, Jack, Pecco are all at the sharp end. And there's always a camera on Tardozzi anyway, but let's have a camera on Tardozzi in that factory Ducati garage in that race, because that's going to be very, very interesting, because I don't see how they can have team orders this weekend if Jack and Enea, I mean, they can obviously say to them, look, and they're not going to be not sensible about it. But for one, it's Jack's home race. Two, Enea wants to win no matter what, and he's still in the title chase. And they've got nothing to lose as such, because they're 39 and 40 points adrift. Obviously, Pecco has a lot to lose, being 2 points off Fabio. So I think that dynamic is going to be interesting this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, as you say, like, absolutely camera on Tardozzi, but we need a microphone on him as well to get exactly what he's saying. But no, it's going to be interesting. The one thing with Ducati is, you know, that, as you say, like, universally, it's agreed, it's the best bike on the grid. Wherever we turn up, you know, the remaining races, of course, we only go to, obviously, here in Australia and Malaysia and Valencia, the bike's going to work regardless. And really, the one kind of where we're not too sure if the bike's going to work everywhere, because we know that Fabio, okay, maybe he's not on the best bike, but he is going to work everywhere, and he's going to make that bike work everywhere. The one person that we haven't really mentioned yet is Aleix Espargaro in the Aprilia. It's obviously an incredible bike this year. It's been pretty ridiculous, the progression Aprilia have made in the last couple of seasons, ever since they switched to that new 90-degree V4 configuration. But we're still seeing there is one big weakness, and perhaps in the second half of the year, that big weakness has shown a lot more than it did in the first half of the season. If you go rewind all the way back to Austria, Aleix and Maverick were struggling a lot. They were really, really struggling on that kind of straight line braking to get the bike stopped. And there was a really, really good indication of just where Aleix was having to compensate with his riding style compared to Ducati, and particularly Pecco. Coming into that new 2A, 2B chicane, you know, short, sharp blast up to fourth gear, whatever it was, and then it was dead straight braking. And you saw Pecco, the way he got on the brakes, like he just dead straight, arrow straight, had the bike stood up right, then he'd let the brakes off and just turn in. And with Aleix, it was as soon as he got on the brakes, he was already starting to lean the bike into the corner and carry some lean angle in. And you could just see that, like, whatever he was doing, it wasn't working to get it stopped. So that bike naturally did not want to brake in a straight line. And it was just making him run on into the corner all the time. And we saw him go wide at the chicane a few times. We saw him go wide at turn 4 several times and into the gravel. Then where else did he suffer with that? Did he suffer in
Thailand?
Thailand suffered with it a bit. Struggled with it a little bit in Aragon, didn't he, as well? But obviously still...
Yeah, Aragon.
Still didn't do too bad. Pulled out a 6th place, I think he was, in Aragon. No, he's on the podium in Aragon, sorry. So, yeah, tricky for Aleix, because those weaknesses kind of come at the wrong time. And then also he's had some bad luck as well. Like, you think back to Silverstone, he had that mammoth crash in, I forget which session it was. Was it FP4?
FP4, I think, yeah, just before qualifying.
And, like, you got to say that all weekend he looked like the top dog and probably was going to win that race on Sunday. And then has that huge crash, breaks his heel, whichever one it was, right or left, I can't remember. And then, you know, finishes and struggles home to 9th. Pretty valiant effort to finish 9th, like pretty incredible. But again, it was a whole chunk of points that Aleix lost, and he's only 20 points behind. Imagine if he had won that race, he would have been right up there, you know. And then even Japan as well. He thinks that he could have won that race. Realistically, probably would have battled for the podium, even if he got third and picked up 16 points. He's 20. He would have been 4 back. So it's you got to say it's kind of if buts and maybes for Aleix. But then you could say that for Pecco. You can say that for Fabio. You can say that for Bastianini. You can say it for Miller. You can say it for all of them. So it's interesting, really. The Aprilia. It's going to be interesting to see just the last 3 races if it can really perform like how it did in the start of the year.
I think they'll go well this weekend. I think they really will. Like a lot of riders and bikes, to be fair, but I do think the only sort of properly straight line braking they've got is obviously turn 1. But it's such a quick corner. You're not on the brakes for too long because you're already tipping it in. And then everywhere else is really sort of lean angle braking. Maybe turn 1, 2, 3, the hairpin. You sort of straight line braking for a little bit, but even then you're coming out of Stoner corner sideways. So I don't think the problem will be too heightened here, like it was in Japan, Thailand, and a couple of the other races as well, like you mentioned. Aleix has had a very good, but also very weird season. Obviously, we had his mistake in Barcelona, where he was on the podium, and then obviously misjudged the lap count. And then the mistake in Japan, where he then didn't finish in the points. I just hope that it doesn't come down to a few points for Aleix, because they'll look back on this year and think what could have been. I know the riders all, no matter where you finish in the season for these top 5, if they don't win the title, they're going to look back and think, I could have picked up a few more points here and there. But I mean, especially for Aleix and Aprilia, it was two human errors that have cost them at least like 30 points or so.
Yeah.
And those points, in hindsight, would now see him leading the championship with what's happened. Obviously, you can't really judge it like that, but there's a lot of points that have been lost through human error, and not just a crash in terms of rider. It's like something we don't see very often at all.
Yeah.
But I think this weekend, like I've said so many times, I think we're just both excited to see what can happen. But I do think Aleix and Aprilia will be very good this weekend, and Maverick as well, who's race winning Phillip Island, kept Marc Marquez company for the whole race in 2019 before that crash, just at the top of Lukey Heights. So Maverick will be a weapon this weekend, I'm sure, as well, which will be help to Aleix, because, like we said about Fabio doesn't have that with Yamaha. Aleix has Maverick, at least fighting for podiums and on the money every weekend. So that'll be another interesting dynamic as well. Maverick obviously wants to win for the first time with Aprilia. Will he move over if Aleix is second, let's say, second behind him? I don't know, probably not. Excuse me, but a big weekend for Aleix. It's, like we say, it's been a weird, especially in the second half of the season as well. Him and Fabio have sort of not reached the heights that we thought they would have they?
No, well, it's like we said earlier that Fabio only scored 47 points since summer break in the last 6 races, and just double checking Aleix. Yeah, like Aleix has only scored 48 points, only one more. And it's for all those reasons you say, and of all the mistakes as well, like the human error made by the mechanic in Japan, like mistakes happen. It's no one's fault. Whatever. Aprilia dealt with it very well. They said it was procedural error, and they're going to update the way they do their procedures and all that. And I think that's the brilliant way to look at it. They didn't play the blame game or anything. They just took it on the chin of the team and like, okay, we'll rebound from it. But if there is one mistake, as you say, that will linger in Aleix's mind, as if he does lose it by a few points, it is that one in Catalonia, because it was purely down to Aleix. And it was heartbreaking to see as well, because home GP, he was on brilliant form all weekend. In the race, he said he struggled a little bit with the bike, but still, he was running second, I think. And then dropped to 5th, and he lost those 9 points that he could have had. And if he does lose it by 9, that's going to be tough to take.
I really hope not.
No. But as you say again about this weekend with Maverick, like it's just another thing that could get in Fabio's way of, it's another bike that he has to overcome. Um, those front guys to be able to break through onto the podium. And yeah, it's gonna be really really hard work. Also, like thinking forward as well for Aprilia, Malaysia. We've seen that the Sepang test at the start of the year they were pretty good, pretty solid, and that was in the early days of understanding this new bike that they have now, because it was updated of course from last season. Um, and you got to say, even like you think back to when they first brought the brand new 2020 bike to Sepang test in 2020 before the whole world went into meltdown with COVID. Everyone was talking about this crazy race run that Aleix had done on this 2020 prototype Aprilia. That they were all like, if he does that in the race or had done it in the race in 2019, he would have been on the podium. And it was like, what? An Aprilia on the podium? At that time, it kind of melted everyone's head. And now obviously we've seen Aprilia on the podium, what, 7 times, something like that this year, 8 times. It's no longer a surprise, but it also just makes you think, Malaysia and the Aprilia, they could be really, really good there. And if they're good this weekend, and say Aleix picks up, even a handful of points over Pecco and Fabio in the next 2 weekends, picks up 4 or 5 points over each of them. Game on in Valencia, like hugely game on.
Time.
And he's the one that everyone thinks at the minute, is probably the least favourite to win the title out of the top 3, and I think that's quite a fair assessment. But you still wouldn't be surprised if he heads to Valencia and he's only 10 points off.
Yeah, I think realistically, Alecia's got to look at that and think, yeah, if I can get within 10 points before Valencia, then anything can happen. If we go to Valencia and there's 3 riders within 10 points, and say Jack or Renee or both are sort of within 20, like the pressure is going to be ramped up on everyone. Yeah. And if you're Aleix and whoever's maybe a little bit further behind, there's no pressure. You go in there, right, all I've got to do is try and win the race. There's no pressure on me because I'm not leading the championship. Anything can happen, and obviously Malaysia's not exactly unprone to wet weather at this time of year. So,
yeah, not half.
So this weekend and next weekend especially, I mean, Valencia in November is not exactly ideal either. No. So the weather, I think, can play a massive part in the next 3 races. So it's going to be very interesting. We were looking at the Sepang test times at the start of the year, weren't we? I mean, it's very difficult and not really that relevant, but we were just interested to see, weren't we?
Yeah.
And it was obviously rain affected, I think, on the last day as well. So we didn't properly get to see a day 2 of everyone going for like race runs and time attacks. But obviously an A was fastest with the new all-time lap record on the obviously 2021 Ducati, which was so good last year. Obviously didn't really have to change much, just hopped on it, got used to it, compared to the last one he was riding, and away he went. But Aleix was second, less than a tenth off. I mean, I think there was like half a second between the top 16 or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
And then I found that Pecco in 6th place was only just over a tenth off. And obviously at that stage, earlier on in the season, the Ducati, the new GP22, they hadn't fine-tuned it, had they? They were struggling a little bit to find sort of the last couple of attempts in race pace and to get it properly firing. Obviously, we've seen since the summer break and just before that as well, they'd obviously sorted it out, and now it's absolutely flying. But even then, when they were still trying to find those little intricate details to try and improve it, get it onto the pace and better than the GP21, it was only a tenth off what Ane did. And then Fabio was 7th, just over a tenth off as well. So it's interesting. Obviously, pretty irrelevant now because that was many months ago and a lot has changed since. But I think it's interesting looking at the timesheets, seeing how close it was. So if we get similar weather in terms of dry weather, as well as this weekend, I think Malaysia is going to be a real showstopper as well.
Yeah, definitely is. I mean, you think back to Malaysia, we've seen the Hondas win there, Yamahas, Ducatis. It all just kind of, it's one of these tracks that more just depends on who feels good on the weekend, it seems. It doesn't seem to really be a particular track suited well to one, because it does have a lot of different characteristics, Malaysia. So I think that's kind of why you often see, we've seen in the past, some walk away victories there. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, if you talk about Malaysia, it's really Fabio's last race where we know he's going to be quite good. Like,
Yeah.
he should be okay there. But it's this whole thing of like, I don't know. It's difficult to say, because we expect Fabio should be good there, but you wouldn't be too surprised if it just doesn't go a little bit wrong for him. And all of that really comes down to qualifying. Like, qualifying is so key for Fabio at the minute. You said earlier that he hasn't had a front row. Was it since Assen? Did you say?
Since Assen, he's not at the front row, yeah, which is quite astonishing. I didn't.
Yeah.
Now I think about it, it's like, okay, that makes sense, but sort of also thinking about it at the same time, like, oh wow, actually he hasn't had a front row. That's quite amazing.
But then, hasn't had a front row since Assen, and since Assen onwards, he hasn't had a win. He's only had one podium. So it's like, obviously, there's that correlation straight away, and we know this because Fabio always says it himself. He says it's absolutely do or die for us to fight for victory on Sunday. We have to qualify on the front two rows. And the trouble is, when you arrive in Malaysia, there's going to be a load of Ducatis that are going to be quick. You look at the test times, and all these guys that can pull out one lap flyers. Bastianini's going to be good. He's obviously going to pull out a good lap. Jorge Martin seems to be getting his confidence back. Obviously going to pull out a big lap. Aleix is going to be quick in Malaysia. I am like, I'll die on that hill. I think Aleix is going to be really, really good in Malaysia. Maverick, it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, Maverick's had a real big switch change and kind of, his progression with the Aprilia during the season. So seeing him go back to Malaysia will be interesting, just to see how competitive he is. And then obviously, you can list off all the others. Jack's going to be good. That Mark isn't going to be, too far off, even in his physical condition at the minute and with the bike the way it is. And even look at guys like Bezzecchi and Marini at the minute that are doing really, really well. If they put in a good lap in qualifying, they could get close to Fabio, and all of a sudden, if Fabio ends up 7th or 8th on the grid, it's going to be pretty much a write-off straight away, which is pretty depressing to say, but it's also like, the stats and statistics don't lie at the minute. He needs that front row or at least second row to get on the podium.
Yeah, 100% true. I mean, there's so many people now. We saw Bezzecchi on pole in Thailand. There's so many Ducatis, and then bring the Aprilias into the mix. Marc Marquez. Who else is there? I mean, Miguel and Brad. I know they've not had the best qualifying form this year, but they can stick a qualifying lap in and get inside the top 10, sort of top two rows at least. So obviously for Fabio, like we've said, it's not too much of a worry in terms of, it is a worry not just for Ducatis, but for all the other bikes that are going on as well. So it's going to be fascinating. Any predictions for this weekend, Jack? I don't really want to make any myself, because I think it's actually fairly impossible to make some predictions this weekend. We've not been to Phillip Island since 2019. And we were having a look at the race, weren't we, in 2019? And that battle for fourth was just incredible. We know Mark and Maverick absolutely flew off into the distance. I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think Marquez is going to have a lot to say in this title race in these last three races.
Yeah, I mean, particularly here in Phillip Island, I think is going to be his best bet of sticking his elbow in, sort of thing. Of course, he's still on 99 Premier Class podiums. That little post-it note's been sat on my second monitor on my desk for a long, long time now. 100 podiums coming up. It's certainly possible. One thing I will say is that Pecco in 2019, I know Phillip Island's a leveler and all this, but Pecco had his best performance by far. I don't know. We'll find out on Friday, FP1, if this is like, Phillip Island just gels with the way Pecco rides or what. But in 2019, he finished fourth. He was less than a tenth behind Miller across the line. His rookie season, and in that year he only had 2 other top 10s, and they were 7th and 9th. Not even close to the podium really. So I don't know. There's just something about Pecco that's got me thinking. Personally, I think Jack's probably going to pull something out of the bag this weekend. I really do. But then I don't know, man. Like, I feel like this
Go
is
on,
when.
say something and stick with it. Go on, I dare you.
Right, I'll say something and stick with it. Okay, this is going to be bad. I'm going to go for a bit of a left field choice because if it comes off, I'll look like a genius.
Okay.
Jack Miller. I'm going to say Maverick and Pecco.
That's not a bad shout, to be fair.
I mean, nothing's a bad shout at the minute.
Yeah.
It's so hard to call.
As a neutral, I do hope Jack wins. Because I just same with like Chancer in Thailand. You just want to see them win, don't you? The home heroes. You just want to see them stand on the top step of the podium. Because it's just good for the sport, isn't it? And obviously Jack's such a popular figure. And then if he does win or beats his fellow title contenders, he's really in the hunt. So yeah, it's not a bad shout. Maverick, I think, will go very well. I'm gonna back Aleix to get back on the podium. I'm gonna back Aleix. But I genuinely think if it's mostly dry all weekend, fingers crossed it is, which isn't a given because the weather forecast doesn't look great. I think especially for Friday. And then there's the wind as well, which can cause havoc. But I'll go for an Aleix podium, Miller on the podium. I just sense a bit of drama. I sense a bit of drama in these last 3 races. Nothing bad, but just like someone not having the best race.
Yeah,
or
some unusual finishes.
Just someone crashing on the last lap, or just something. I mean, maybe Enea goes and wins this weekend by like 2-3 seconds.
So there's a big point for Enea this weekend. And when just after I said about my podium prediction, I remembered it and I went, oh wait, hang on. So who's the best with tyre life on the grid?
I mean, Enea, I don't think it's arguable, is it?
Yeah, he's pretty good, eh? So I mean, Phillip Island, we go to it and it's a pretty high tyre consumption track. Doesn't matter whether the temperature's hot or cold. It's pretty brutal on tyres. We've seen it in the past. Where I think one year there was a mandatory pit stop. Was it 2013 or 2015? That mandatory pit stop year.
Something like
that, wasn't it?
2013 because it was Mark's title winning year when he got black flag.
Yes. Yeah. So like it's pretty high tyre consumption track, and I think if it comes down to it and everyone's struggling with the tyres at the end, I think Enea could be a little bit of a spoiler. And I mean, if he goes and wins it, and Pecco and Fabio are off the podium, then wow, it's going to be interesting.
It is his first time. It is his first time, obviously, this weekend at Phillip Island on a MotoGP bike. So that's also something to take into account. So I expect him to have maybe a slow start and then build his way into it. But yeah, good point about tyre wear. I didn't think of that either. But yeah, that's a good shout. Let's have your title prediction then. We've been going for nearly an hour, so let's end on making ourselves look a bit silly.
Well, I mean, I'll stick with my bet that I placed in. When did I place it? In February this year. I'm going to say Pecco. I don't know. Just I thought at some point this year he would come good, and he finally has. Took a little bit longer than I thought, maybe, but at least with certain way that things have worked this year, it's turned out that the late run isn't too late. So yeah, I'm going to say Pecco.
I think it'll be Pecco as well, but for the sake of going a bit different, I'll say someone else. Honestly, I don't mind who wins it. Fabio, for me, deserves it the most the way he's ridden. Pecco admittedly has the best bike, but he's also shown this year when he strings a few races together, he's quicker than anyone on the grid. I think I'll just go with Aleix just because I think the story would be fantastic. I've had a
Oh,
couple of
amazing.
heated debates, let's say, with our colleagues Jack Capriard and Simon Craft. I think it was in Japan. They were saying not that they don't want Aleix to win, but it wouldn't be as good a story as I'm saying it is. But I just think from where Aleix has come from, and Aprilia have come from, I just think it'd be
It'd be brilliant.
such a like a fairy tale is probably not the right word, but you know what I mean. From
Yeah,
Aleix almost quitting a few years ago, Aprilia scraping points to them coming last year with a good bike and getting that podium, but to then come with this year with the second best bike on the grids, arguably the first at some tracks. Um, I think it'd be awesome. But I
it'd be
understand
cool.
also what Jack and Crayfile were saying. Obviously, a few others agree with them as well that they'd prefer to see sort of Fabio or Pecco to win, which I
Yeah,
understand as well. I
I
obviously I
think
don't mind
there's
who wins, but and I think an Aleix title win would be a fantastic story.
I think there's quite a few good points for like each of them to want to win. So there's this really really nice story that's a bit of a like, ooh, it's a spicy one. That obviously there's all talk that Marc Marquez is trying to build for 2023, and so are Honda. We have our suspicions that their bike for next year could be a little bit different again, or at least a small adaptation of the concept. Um, and like say if Honda come out next year and the bike is there or thereabouts, it's in the ballpark, and Mark is also there or thereabouts, as it seems he is. Um, there's no reason why Marc Marquez can't go and fight for a title next year.
No,
Uh,
absolutely.
but there's a really nice point to say we'd quite like to see Fabio win the title, because then it's like this new king of MotoGP, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden the old king comes back with this new weapon to take him back into battle, sort of thing. Um, there's a nice little like kind of clash there of like, okay, I'm the king now, and I'm going to show you the reason why. And then also Mark coming back and yeah, I am the you're only holding the throne for me while I was sorting myself out. Then
Yeah.
there's also the whole thing of kind of it'd be cool to see Pecco win it, because then it's like you have Fabio as a world champion who's annoyed and bitterly disappointed that he didn't win that second title again. Yamaha coming out with this, new more powerful engine next year, and kind of Fabio already kind of licking his lips after that first taste of it in the test. And if he doesn't win the title this year again, and Pecco does, then it's like this. Okay, it's nice. You've got the reigning champ Pecco, Fabio out with a point to prove, and then Mark coming back also with a point to prove. So there's a really nice dynamic there. But then, if you throw a spanner in the works and as you say, Aleix goes and win the title, then it's like it's this oldest guy on the grid, the guy that for so many years people said, doesn't deserve the right to be there. Like, why is he there and all this sort of stuff. And I think you're just proving that there's no shelf life on riders of this kind of short. Like, you give them 2-3 years, and if they don't perform, they're never going to succeed. Um, and also, you look back at your career. I'll defend Aleix to within an inch of his life. I think he's a class rider. Like, I really do.
Yeah.
You look back
We've
throughout,
shown
and
that
he's always beaten his teammates and stuff like this. So yeah, it would be nice. I don't know, like as you say, all of them would be an epic story. But my head says that Pecco's going to win it.
Yeah, and my head says Pecco as well. Maybe my heart's saying something different, but there's so many cool narratives. No matter who wins it, obviously, if Anea or Jack win it from here, then it's an astonishing achievement from where they were earlier in the year. I know Anea was leading, but he had that spell of really bad results, like a couple of DNFs, I think it was, and didn't have a
Yeah,
podium for a few races. Like best of like eighth, I think it was, sort of after his Le Mans victory. Obviously, Jack winning it would be just astonishing for
can you imagine
what
the
he's
party
what
on
he's
Sunday
been
night in
through. And,
Valencia?
mate. Yeah, I mean for that, obviously let's have Jack win it. No, but I think my head says Pecco as well. My head says Pecco as well,
Yeah,
but my heart wants it to be an Aleix or a Miller, I think. But I'd be happy with anyone winning it. I think Fabio, like I say, deserves it for the way he's ridden. I just think with the circuits that are now left, apart from Phillip Island, I just think it's a mammoth task. So if he does do it from here, say he gets a couple of podiums and whatever he needs in Valencia or vice versa, I think it'll be astonishing. So we've been going for a good hour now, mate. So let's wrap things up. There's the press conference, of course, coming up very shortly indeed. So thanks for joining me. We'll go have another coffee.
Thank you for having me.
I'm starting to feel the effects again. So I need some more caffeine ahead of the double press conference we've got.
And need the second breakfast. That's what we need.
Yeah, I've had anything to do actually. So yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, hope everyone watching along live. If you are up early this hour in the morning in Europe, then fair play to you. Not sure what you're doing, but fair play to you. If you're watching from elsewhere, yeah, go back to bed. If you're watching from elsewhere in the world, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening at a later date when we upload it to other streaming platforms. And yeah, we'll see you next time around. So enjoy the Australian GP. We're certainly going to. I'm off for it, so I'm going to enjoy it. I am going to get up early and watch it, though. I will say that.
Good man. I'll ring you. Make sure that I wake you up.
Because I know if I don't, I'll just get all the spoilers and that'll just annoy me greatly. So I'm going to get up and watch qualifying in the race and then probably have a snooze afterwards. But yeah, looking forward to it. And yeah, hopefully it's a good weekend. Obviously, Malaysia up after that as well, double header.
Yeah.
And then Valencia. So the home stretch, and it's very exciting. So yeah, top job. See you next time around. Thanks for watching.
Ciao for now.